Joseph Haydn died on May 31st, 1809, in Vienna, while Napoleon's army was busy shelling the city, which meant that even in his final moments, the man could not catch a break from being upstaged by louder Europeans. He was buried without much fuss in the Huntsturm Cemetery, and by all rights, that should have been the end of the story. A composer dies, a composer is buried, a composer stays buried. This is generally how it works. Haydn, however, was about to become the exception that proves the rule that graves are, at minimum, supposed to be a one-time destination. Enter Joseph Karl Rosenbaum, a man who had once served as secretary to the Esterhazy family and who harbored a passionate hobby that history has since filed under well-intentioned but deeply questionable: phrenology, the pseudoscience of reading personality and genius from the bumps on someone's skull. Rosenbaum did not simply admire Haydn's music. He wanted to get his hands directly on the container that had produced it. Not metaphorically, literally. He wanted the skull, and he wanted it soon, before decomposition made the whole operation significantly less appealing. So Rosenbaum teamed up with his friend Johann Nepomuk Peter, a prison official with some anatomical know-how, and apparently no immediate plans that weekend. Together, they bribed the gravedigger, because it turns out that in early 19th century Vienna, grave robbery had a going rate, and a gravedigger willing to look the other way for the right price. About 11 days after the funeral, under cover of night, the two men dug up Haydn, removed his head with the tools Peter had on hand, and reburied the now headless composer as though nothing at all had happened. One imagines the gravedigger going home that night, having a stiff drink, and deciding never to speak of Tuesday again. Rosenbaum took the skull home and treated it with a mixture of reverence and, frankly, unsettling affection. He had it cleaned, mounted in a black velvet-lined box, and put on display for houseguests, which must have made for a truly unforgettable evening of small talk. There are accounts suggesting he kept it near his bed and would occasionally take it out just to look at it, the way some people keep a beloved houseplant they talk to, but somewhat more homicidal in its backstory. He was, in his own strange way, a devoted fan, just an extremely literal one. The scheme held together for over a decade, mostly because nobody had any particular reason to check on Haydn's skeletal completeness. That changed in 1820, when Prince Nicholas Esterhazy II decided it was time to move Haydn's remains to a grander resting place in Eisenstadt, befitting a composer of his stature. This required opening the coffin, which is one of those moments where a con held together by nobody looking too closely finally meets somebody looking very closely indeed. The prince's men discovered, to considerable alarm, that Haydn's head was simply gone, replaced by nothing, because the concept of a decoy skull had not yet occurred to anyone. Word got back to Rosenbaum that the prince was furious and demanding the skull's return immediately, under threat of serious legal consequences. Rosenbaum, who had spent over a decade treating the skull like a beloved pet, was extremely reluctant to hand it over. So he did what any man in his position would do. He acquired a different skull from somewhere else entirely, of dubious and unverified origin, and presented it to the prince as the genuine article. The prince, apparently satisfied, had this substitute skull sealed into Haydn's tomb with full solemnity, and the real skull stayed exactly where it had been the whole time, sitting in Rosenbaum's house, presumably feeling smug about the whole affair. The real skull continued its tour of Viennese high society for decades afterward, changing hands between collectors and anatomists the way a particularly macabre heirloom might get passed down at a family reunion nobody wants to attend. It eventually landed with the Gesellschaft der Musikfreunde, the Society of Friends of Music in Vienna, who received it in 1895, and in the finest tradition of institutions everywhere, kept it in a box and mostly didn't talk about it. For decades, Austria was in the delightful position of having two Haydn skulls in active circulation, one buried with full honors and entirely fake, and one very real one sitting in a society office, effectively estranged from the body it was legally supposed to be attached to. This absurd standoff finally resolved in 1954, a full 145 years after Haydn's death, when Prince Paul Esterhazy arranged for the real skull to be formally reunited with the skeleton at the Burgkirche in Eisenstadt. There was an actual ceremony. Dignitaries attended. And then came the truly wonderful bureaucratic punchline. Rather than remove the fake skull that had been resting there in dignified silence for over a century, on the theory that it too had, in its own way, earned its place, the authorities simply placed both skulls in the tomb together. Haydn was buried, at last, with twice the number of heads he was born with, which feels like the kind of arrangement only classical music history could produce with a straight face. Somewhere in the afterlife, one hopes Haydn found the whole saga as funny as the rest of us do, because after everything he went through, the man had absolutely earned the last laugh, even if he technically had two skulls with which to laugh at.